And now, in less than 2 weeks, the United States will hold its presidential elections. The November 5th election has been described as a tight presidential race between Democrats candidate and current Vice President Kamala Harris and Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump. Now, a Reuters Ipsos poll that came out recently shows that Harris has a marginal lead over Trump nationally, 46% to 43%. And a South African-born billionaire Elon Musk has also shown his support for Republicans and pledged to give away $1 million per day to a randomly selected voter who signs his online petition pledging to support the First and Second Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which protect the rights to free speech and gun ownership. So to give us some perspective on the latest coming out on that U.S. presidential election, we are joined virtually now by Brooks Spector, Associate Editor at Daily Maverick and retired American diplomat. Brooks, always a pleasure having you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Well, good morning. Good to be here. It's good. This is going to be, I hate to use old phrases, but this is going to be one for the ages. It's absolutely the case. This is an astonishing set of circumstances. There's no way around it.
Oh, absolutely. And only 12 days out to that election day. But of course, we've already seen early voting that has already started. We're told that the candidates are neck and neck. But is there anything that we can read into this final push into the election day?
Yes, there is actually. And it's a very important thing. Beyond all of the accusations of Donald Trump's fascist tendencies and beyond all the personal indiscretions that he has been accused of and with much finger pointing and beyond the questions of whether or not Kamala Harris has the necessary experience, background, and strength of purpose to become president, the real question now, it's almost forget what the polls say. It will be a battle of turnout. And by this, I mean getting your people to the polls in larger numbers than they otherwise might have been, encouraging supporters to vote, encouraging supporters to cast their advance ballots, to encouraging supporters to show up on election day. And as you rightly point out, somewhere north of 10 million people have already voted by advance voting and mail-in ballots, which means that their decisions have already been baked into the process, and they are no longer susceptible to further claims or urgings on the part of the candidates because they've already made their choice. And this will be and become increasingly true over the next couple of days as more and more people's ballots show up in advance. And so what we have now are the two candidates really battling not for a national lead one way or the other, but for support in 6 or 7 states, which will actually ultimately decide who wins. And these are places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, because in the United States, unlike some countries, the popular vote is not the ultimate determiner. It's won state by state by state, and the relative demographic or population weight of those states become what is known as the electoral vote or electoral college. And so you don't win by simply winning massive majorities in New York or California, but you win in all the states where the support is delicately positioned somewhere between 50 and 50%, place like Pennsylvania. And it isn't even the state of Pennsylvania now, it's the suburban areas around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that become the ultimate determiner. So it's the two candidates and their respective parties are busy trying to get the last amount of support possible from increasingly narrow collections of potential voters. Makes it both interesting and frustrating because the polling data no longer gives you an adequate or complete guide to what's going to happen next.
And with the race so tight, and just staying with this question of demographics, Brooks, you speak about, suburban areas and in those swing states and where the focus ought to be. If these candidates were to drill down with regard to these demographics, where would you say they should focus on critically? And also, when you look at it, what would be the key issues that would drive voter behavior in this election, would you say?
Okay, well, let's take the second part of your question first. Over the last number of months, it's become clear that there are a collection of issues which have become the preeminent questions for voters and voters' minds. One of them is the question of immigration, whether it is in check or whether it is wild and uncontrolled, whether immigrants by and large are good for the country or whether they represent some sort of menacing force. The second one is economic, and that's to say not necessarily the big economic numbers, but how people feel about their own personal circumstances, what sometimes is referred to as kitchen table economics. Do I feel that my personal economic circumstances are getting better or getting worse? And the third key issue for many voters, not all, but many, certainly, and a goodly share of female voters, is women's reproductive rights and control of one's body. And that's a longhand way of saying restrictions on abortion. And the moving down the scale, then it's the question of defining and defending democratic values, which is something that the Kamala Harris campaign has been very, very strong in stating this. And a number of former Trump supporters and even office bearers in his previous administration have, in the last number of days, have basically said, you can't vote for this man. He has fascist tendencies, or in the case of a few, simply said, yes, all things considered, I would consider him a fascist, period. And you get people like Liz Cheney, who was a stalwart Republican for many years, having showed up now at Kamala Harris rallies saying, look, I don't agree with her on everything, but for goodness sake, please don't vote for Donald Trump. The first part of your question, the candidates are by and large focusing on precisely those specific areas within swing states or battleground states where the race is going to be determined. And this includes counties surrounding a city like Philadelphia, Bucks County, Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, where the tradition, years gone by, would have been sort of centrist Republican, but is now, in many of those cases, also split 50-50, according to opinion polls anyway. And so they are having rallies, they are having meetings, they're sending out surrogates, that is, people speaking on behalf of the candidate. And this is taking place in Pennsylvania, this is taking place in Michigan and Wisconsin, and in Georgia and in North Carolina. So all of these factors are in play now. And as one of the best interpreters of elections that I know of and listen to, Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia, says, it's all about turnout now, whether you can convince your supporters to either vote in advanced terms or to show up on election day and stand in line and vote in the polling stations. It's no longer a question of, well, what do I think? It's a question, what am I going to do?
And that's an interesting point, because I was going to ask you about voter enthusiasm and the sort of role that would play in this election, given how close it is. But if we look at the fundraising efforts on both sides, so, how have these fundraising efforts for both candidates actually influenced this race, would you say, Brooks?
Well, fundraising is an art and a science, and it's also some sort of secret priesthood all at the same time rolled together. Kamala Harris has been extraordinarily successful in generating lots of small and middling sized contributions some weeks ago, the number of dollars that had been raised by her for her campaign, as opposed to those separate support political action committees, was somewhere close to $1 billion, which is, at least in my household, a fair amount of money. And it's all being spent on all manner of things, but it gives them a real edge in the ability to buy television and online advertising, to pay for all the equipment rental and all the travel and all the polling and all the support of salaries for people who are working on the campaign. It gives them that flexibility. On the other side of things is what is sometimes called dark money, because it isn't directly contributed to campaigns. It's contributed to organizations that say that they are supporting an idea or a principle. And this would include much of the money that somebody like Elon Musk has offered effectively to the Trump campaign, but not specifically directly within the campaign itself. It's to support, as you mentioned, this petition thing that he has for I'm supporting the First and Second Amendments to the Constitution. I will register to vote, and then without saying it, and you know who I'm going to vote for, right? But that's been matched to a considerable degree by monies that have been contributed by people like Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates to the Democrats, or to political action committees for the Democrats, shall we say. But there's one other factor, we have to just sort of mention it quickly because I know you were short on time, that the surrogates who are coming out to speak on behalf of the candidates, the preeminent person who has done this has been somebody that you'll remember, Barack Obama. He used to be president, and he still has this electric influence on people at rallies and at campaign stops. And he has been truly vociferous in saying that the legacy that he and his administration built cannot be frittered away or destroyed by somebody like Donald Trump. And I think to a considerable degree, he's been very effective in making that case. But 12 or 13 days from now, we'll know. But we may not even know at that point, because if it's really close and they're really counting votes and there are calls for recounts in states, this may stretch out a few days. We may not know on November 6th who won. It may take a while, in which case I don't get any sleep at all.
I doubt that you are going to get much of that, Brooks. So we certainly will be keeping you busy, amongst many others, I would imagine. But as we count down, thanks so much for helping us with your perspective on how things are actually stacking up in this election. Brooks Spector, our guest there. And of course, we'll be speaking to him hopefully quite a bit more in the lead up to and post that election. Brooks Spector is, of course, a former American diplomat and also with Daily Maverick, talking to us about the United States presidential election race between Democrats candidate Vice President Kamala Harris and Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump. Your views always welcome at Morning Live, SABC.